Hey, Originals listeners, I am so sorry to do this. I've avoided these through our 26 episodes together, but today I have to put on my journalism professor hat and do a little J-School lesson. The topic for today, the icebreaker. You've all probably used icebreakers in social situations, innocuous little questions or comments that serve to relax a stranger you hope to get to know better. I love your tie. Where did you get a tan like that in February? That dog is adorable. Can I pet it? They happen to be incredibly important in the context of interviews because they'll set the stage for the rest of the conversation. If the interview subject is amused or charmed, they'll likely relax. So if later in that interview, there happen to be probing, maybe even awkward questions, they're going to respond with honesty and equanimity because by then you'll have developed a rapport. The foundation of great interview rapport is the well-chosen icebreaker. I pride myself on my icebreakers. I'm very good at them. Or at least I thought I was very good at them until this interview with James Ellroy you're about to hear. One important piece of setup. If you didn't know anything about James Ellroy and heard only my icebreaker for him, you'd think, Goldman, you're out of your goddamn mind to think that asking such a thing would relax any subject or endear them to you. But as you know, if you listen to my show, I do a lot of research beforehand. And magazine and newspaper profiles are valuable. But for me, the Rosetta Stone to understanding someone is what they've written about themselves. You probably know Ellroy for his 20-plus crime novels, which include his breakout hit, 1987's The Black Dahlia, as well as L.A. Confidential, the basis for the critically beloved 1997 film that made Russell Crowe a star. Maybe you read his critically praised 1995 novel, American Tabloid, which Audible Originals is currently adapting into a series featuring the voice talents of Brian Cox, Bobby Cannavale, and Elliot Gould. But Ellroy is also the author of 2 memoirs. In 1996's My Dark Places, not only did Ellroy endeavor to find the man behind the unsolved 1958 murder of his mother, Jean, who was strangled and dumped after a night out drinking in El Monte, California, he also recounted his youth and young manhood as a speed freak and petty criminal living in Los Angeles. His other memoir is The Hilliker Curse, which provides an exhaustive accounting of his sexual and romantic life up to the book's 2010 publication. Hilliker, it should be noted, is the maiden name of his mother, the memory of whom, he recounts, became his erotic ideal. Like most of us, much of Ellroy's sex as a young man was experienced alone. But Ellroy, aided by a lot of booze and speed, was more extreme than most. He recounts his peeping jag through Los Angeles and frenzies of onanism that would have embarrassed Philip Roth. His erotic fixations, he wrote, were on the Hancock Park girls, their mothers, guest star actresses on The Fugitive, women glimpsed on my obsessive window peeps. And the result, he wrote, was, I masturbated myself bloody. And he recounts the years he nearly went broke, availing himself of the services of Sunset Strip streetwalkers. So this was, more than anyone I'd interviewed before, a sex-positive public figure. One of his girlfriends even refers to his outlook as his perv view. So there's the background for what you're about to hear. But yeah, I really blew it with this one. James Ellroy, welcome to the Originals.
Hey, Big Daddy-O, good to talk to you. Good to see you on my ex-wife girlfriend's computer screen.
First of all, what should I call you? Should I call you Mr. Ellroy? Should I call you James? Should I call you Demon Dog? What would you prefer?
Mr. Ellroy and Mr. Goldman's good the first time around. Then the amenities are out of the way. For all I care, you can call me Dog Motherfucker. And I wish you would.
Okay.
Dog or James is fine.
Okay, I think James might be easier to remember and I'll feel a little less foolish.
Okay.
Before I actually ask you the first question, I want you to tell our listeners who don't know all that much about you, because there's something about this that's interesting to me. Tell me about your relationship with technology, how you write your books, how you communicate either via letters, via the internet. Please, unless anything's changed, I think it's a very curious relationship you have with technology.
Yeah, I'm computer illiterate. I've never used a computer. My ex-wife girlfriend, the redoubtable Helen Canode, lives down the hall from me. Monogamy ain't the deal for me. Nah, it's cohabitation. That's tough. I decided against computers early on because I heard they're bad for your eyes. I've written all 22 of my books and done film and TV work all by hand. I have assistants who research for me, type for me, run errands for me, and my current assistant lives in LA. I have a landline phone, which I would have preferred to have talked to you on, and I have a fax machine. I have black pens, white notebook paper, and red correction pens. I'll never go on the internet. Again, my ex-wife girlfriend, the redoubtable Helen Canode, calls the internet the world's worst party, and history has proved her correct. That's just technology.
James, I just want to ask you something. I've read a lot about you. I feel like I know a lot about you. Perhaps sometimes when I've been reading about you, I feel like I know too much about you. Do you know how much I know enough about you to know that you would be a consumer of an incredible amount of free pornography that is available on the internet? And do you have somebody searching for pornography for you, or are you the guy that's going to the store and actually...
Brother, you're insulting me. I mean, for real, right off the bat. That is a bullshit question.
Okay.
I didn't think this was going to be some kind of cheap shit, shock jock broadcast. Change your tone now, or this is going. And I'm for real here. No, I'm saying no.
Okay, James. I've read your books. I'm sorry that you feel that way, but
I told you this.
Do you want to end it now? Actually, you got
this
photographers coming.
Cocksucker asks me if I've got somebody who scans the internet for pornography. Fuck you.
Wow. Why would he do that?
And yes, that sound you just heard was indeed the snapping shut of a laptop. And this is where the Zoom conversation stopped. But, as you'll hear, we pick back up 5 minutes after, thanks to the cool head of the producer of Ellroy's new podcast, Jimmy Jelinek, who encouraged us to try again. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. I spent decades interviewing celebrities for magazines, the vast majority of whom were just there to sell something and shared very little of themselves. So I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually had something to say, wanted to express something real. James Ellroy did come on with something to sell. His excellent Audible Originals series, James Ellroy's Hollywood Deathtrip, an audio retelling of some of his magazine stories about unsolved murders. And it's a great show. I highly recommend it. It does an incredible job of recreating LA's sleazy noir past. But James Ellroy is also a great talker. He's famous for his readings at which he's consistently profane and says a lot of things that he probably shouldn't, which of course makes them unmissable events. In fact, he starts every episode of his Audible series the same way he welcomes guests to readings. Like this.
Good evening, peepers, prowlers, pederass, pedants, panty sniffers, punks, and pimps. I'm James Ellroy, the death dog with the hog log, the foul owl with the death growl, and the slick trick with the donkey dick. Yeah!
Welcome to the fittingly unlucky 13th episode of our third season, produced in proud partnership with Los Angeles Magazine. Although this wasn't intended as a noisy explosion-filled 4th of July special, it inadvertently turned into one. James Ellroy, welcome to The Originals.
Hey, Daddy-O, it's good to be here.
Now, I wanted to start with technology because I got a little bit about your relationship with technology, and I want you to answer a question honestly, because knowing what I know about your relationship to technology and knowing that you've created a podcast, have you ever heard a podcast before?
The only way I would read for money and attribution on the air would be my own magazine pieces in short form or epic form, my big novels. Before you know it, Jimmy Jelinek, whom I had heard about but had never met, had called Andrew Wiley, and there we have James Ellroy's Hollywood Deathtrip, my magazine pieces for GQ and Vanity Fair, read aloud, by me. And it began to expand in my mind what this was. A means to perfectly transpose in the author's original voice, unedited, unabridged, unexpurgated, the printed word to the human ear. We don't have to worry about jive actors and actresses and abridgment for feature movies or TV shows. It's the voice. The people who listen to the podcasts are obliged to supply their own visuals. And I said to myself, holy shit, this is great.
I get the sense from, reading the trades about you over the years that your relationship with Hollywood has been, would you call it mixed? It hasn't been totally happy. I mean, you've written a lot of scripts. You've had one absolutely fantastic film adaptation of your books, LA Confidential. You have one, The Black Dahlia, which I don't know I do know how you feel about it, it didn't get great reviews and didn't do great business, but I gather it sold you a ton of books.
Let's put it this way, Mr. Goldman. The Black Dahlia movie sold 40 times as many books for me and made me 40 times the royalty dough in 7 weeks than LA Confidential has made in 25 years. I didn't like The Black Dahlia. Now that the director, Curtis Hanson, who was a friend of mine, has passed away, I can tell the truth about LA Confidential, the movie. I didn't like it. I don't think it's any good. No.
What didn't you like about it? I mean, it feels like it was critically beloved. Mm-hmm. It made Russell Crowe a star. Mm-hmm. Tell me what you didn't like about it.
It's about as deep as a tortilla.
Okay. So when I read, American Tabloid was in development with many different people, and the most beloved person, I think, in Hollywood at one point had it, and one of the least beloved, at least by journalist standards, people had it. Maybe we shouldn't speak ill of Bruce Willis because he's not well. But Tom Hanks, did you have meetings with everybody? James Franco?
I never met James Franco. He talked about American Tabloid. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room here. I met Tom Hanks incidental to American Tabloid at a party once. We had an affable conversation. That was that.
So do you feel like when people talk about development hell, you've lived it, or do you just sort of sit back in Denver where you are now?
I was handsomely compensated for the work I did. At a certain point, it all went south. That's okay. I knew the risk going in.
I wanted to see what you thought. Obviously, you solved the Black Dahlia case in a fictional way in your novel. What did you think about this guy? Do you have any feelings about this George Hodel who thinks that...
So it's a bunch of horseshit. I co-signed the Steve Hodel's idea. I regretted it. I like Steve. He's an ex-LAPD man. I hope he's okay because he's getting up there. He's 10 years or so older than me. And no, I don't credit any idea. There's a woman named Mary Pacios Humphreys who contends that Orson Welles sliced the Black Dahlia. I don't buy that one either. Nobody's credible.
So if you signed on and then signed off, was there one moment where you said, this has got to be bullshit? Was it after he decided that perhaps his father was also the Zodiac killer?
I led with my heart going in. I liked Steve. He's an ex-LAPD man. I met him several times. If you look at the photograph, his proffered photograph of the woman that he says is Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, you go, that's not her. It's somebody else.
Yeah.
Every sentient person I know who's read the book has agreed with me on that.
You know what I love about you? And I do love you, even though perhaps it didn't seem like it at the beginning. Yeah. What I love about you is you're somebody that it seems to be probably not willing to be on message. And I found a quote, and I wanted to know whether it was apocryphal or whether you actually said it at a reading. There was a reading before The Black Dahlia was released that said, my novel, The Black Dahlia, will be poorly filmed in March of next year by overrated auteur Brian De Palma. Fatuously good-looking Josh Hartnett and Scarlett Johansson will weakly star in this vehicle. I predict an intriguing flop that will nevertheless sell me a shitload of books. Was that actually
I don't
you?
recall saying it.
Oh, you don't?
That's my candid answer. It sounds like something I would say.
Okay. I have a clip I want to play from the very beginning of your Audible series because I think the story of your mother is so central to who you are.
Dead women own me. On the hot, smoggy day, Sunday, June 22nd, 1958, when I was 10 years of age, my old man, divorced from my old lady, took me back to El Monte from downtown LA in a series of shitty bus rides and cab rides. Cops were swarming over the front yard of the cheapo pad where I lived with my mother. I knew immediately that she was dead. It was murder, and dead women have owned me this subsequent intervening 64 years.
You tell the story of your mother, Jean Ellroy, was murdered in 1958, and you tell it in a very intriguing way. This is not a murder that made the front pages of the LA Times, was it?
No, it was an obscure, sexually motivated crime that went unsolved. The big murder of the first half of 1958 was the Lana Turner, Cheryl Crane, Johnny Stompanato snuff in April. Big LA story.
Can you briefly, for the audience, tell us what happened to your mother that night?
My mother's name was Jean Hilliker Ellroy. She was 43. She was a tall, good-looking redhead. She worked at Airtech Dynamics as an industrial nurse. 6 months earlier, prior to her death, she moved us from nice staid Santa Monica out to the dog-breathed San Gabriel Valley. It was hot, it was smoggy, it was scary to sensitive 9 and 10-year-old Ellroy. Man had either a pre-existing relationship with her, maybe intimate, maybe not, we will never know, or met her that night. She was seen twice at Stan's Drive-In, once at a honky-tonk joint called the Desert Inn. Her body was found the following morning by some scouts and a scoutmaster. She had been garroted with a sash cord and one of her own nylon stockings and dumped into some bushes adjoining Arroyo High School in El Monte. Unsolved crime.
You know, in reading the accounts of it, the fact that she was with a mysterious blonde, that it wasn't just the two of them in this bar, that there was a blonde. I mean, does this speak to just bad detective work at the time? If there's 3 people there, shouldn't you be able to find the blonde?
She never came forward. They never determined her. It was determined that no one, regulars at the bar, had ever seen either of these people, the man and the blonde woman, before. It was the pre-DNA, pre-forensic file TV show, pre-internet era. It got local magazine play, some radio play, no TV play, it faded. It was an exhaustive police investigation that in the end proved fruitless.
Now, I think that when anybody hears something like this happens, we would imagine a crying boy who forever is mourning the loss of her mother, but it wasn't quite as simple for you, was it?
No. My parents were divorced. My mother was strict. She was a toe-the-line World War II era woman. My dad, who's considerably older than her, whom I saw only on weekends, was a let-it-fly guy, a skirt chaser, a guy who bought me soda pop and comic books. I was 10, very impressionable. Who do you think I wanted to live with? All of a sudden, bam, she's dead. At the time of her death, my most devout wish was to live with my dad exclusively. It came true at a horrible price.
So I don't know if you've ever explicitly said it. Do you feel guilt about this? You said that you feel like you actually, and I don't know whether I should take this literally, that you actually somehow conjured a spell. There was a text that you were reading at the time, and you felt like it's possible you willed her dead. Do you really believe that?
In my 10-year-old boy's imagination, I did. It stuck with me for a while. Retrospectively, I can only recall what I thought. And I've written 2 memoirs now. My imagination is for American history, LA history. I'm an LA guy backwards and forwards. But recreating your emotional state, your mental state from 30 years, 35 years in the future, oh shit. That puts all writers and memoirists into disingenuous territory.
You wrote a fantastic memoir called My Dark Places about actually researching the case and teaming up with a retired LA cop to try to solve it. You didn't solve it. Later on, you wrote that you didn't believe you would solve it, and I kind of got the impression that you didn't want to really solve it. That I think that you've said that the idea families always want closure, that you feel like closure is kind of bullshit.
Yeah, I think closure is bullshit. I wanted to solve it, but some part of my bunky brain that understands myself to be an exploiter of tragedy, an opportunist, a literary glory hound, a good public speaker, a good podcast reader, understood, man, this is up against it. It was at that time, 1994, 36 years in the past. I was 10 then, I was 46 at the then now. And I was pessimistic, but I still put a lot of dough into it. I paid Bill Stoner, my friend, the retired sheriff's homicide detective, some good dough to help me out. Staying away from my wife, at the time for 15 months was taxing on the relationship, taxing on my pocketbook. And I spent most of the advance on rentals and buying steak dinners for Stoner and me as we drove all over LA talking to people who said, oh, yeah, Miss Hilliker, Mrs. Ellroy, I remember her. Did she have boyfriends? I don't know. It was like taking a tour through the faulty memory zone of elderly people.
Yeah.
And in the end, nothing played.
I think that it is a brilliant memoir. It was incredibly brave for you to say that there was something sort of psychosexual with your mother, that you saw her naked when you were a kid and that you would eventually fantasize about her. Was this something that you wrestled with talking about, or was
Yeah, it was. There are lines of decorum that I would cross at 46 in my first memoir that I wouldn't cross now as a 70-year-old man who writes only fiction. No, I wouldn't do it now. But I'm not being asked to do it now.
Yeah.
And it's impossible. This was the memoir of a man in early middle age, very much.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you somewhat regret that.
No.
Oh, you don't?
I'm not a guy who harbors regrets.
Yeah. And you also say quite clearly in the Hilliker Curse, which was written decades later when you were older, that you have a type, and your type.
Let's not talk about my old girlfriends, Mr. Goldman. I don't want to talk about it. I know you want me to read an excerpt from the Hilliker Curse. Depending on what it is, I'd be happy, and I got a copy of the book right here.
Well, I wasn't talking specifically about your ex-girlfriends. I mean, I was talking about your current girlfriend, too, who talks about the...
Well, Helen Canode, my second ex-wife.
Yeah, that your redhead obsession. I mean, she talks about it. It didn't seem like it was any secret that you like tall redheads.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay. So it doesn't sound like you necessarily want to talk about your second memoir. So let's talk about... There was one place that I thought was actually really interesting about your relationship with women. It was a paragraph on page 71 of the Hilliker Curse.
Okay, I'll read that paragraph.
All right. I would love to talk to you about the book, but I don't want to go into any territory that's going to make you angry. But you are famously a person who women fall in love with. I mean, you've been a guy, and we don't have to talk about your ex-girlfriends.
Oh, it's just shit, man. Hey, Mr. Goldman, how old are you?
I'm turning 50.
Wow, you're turning 50. All of a sudden, 70, 71, 72, that shit's for real.
Yeah.
So if you got qualms about turning 50,
I didn't say I had. No, I didn't say I had qualms. I don't have a big party.
Okay.
I'm happy that I can
have
climb
a big
up a mountain.
party.
Yeah.
And have a blast there. 71, 72, you look back and you see the things of youth. You see a horrible propensity for indecorous behavior on your part. And you go, oh, shit. You live and you learn.
Yeah.
And I hope I have. As Jesse Jackson famously said some decades ago, be patient. God isn't through with me yet. So go ahead.
Well, okay. So then, can you tell me specifically what you regret? What this indecorous behavior was?
Chasing women. It's what I cop to in this paragraph that you requested I read from the Hilliker Curse. And here it is.
Okay.
I was a ruthlessly attuned listener and self-serving confidant. I was adept at dissecting devolving relationships and merciless in my critique of feckless men. Interrogator, interlocutor, pal, rebuker of male weakness, the murdered mother's son, the feminist with the right-wing chivalry code, the demonizer of all misogynistic men, the guy who always wanted to get laid, the guy who always let the women lean in for the first kiss.
It is a great paragraph, and I want to talk to you all about it. I just feel like there's landmines all over. So you have changed since then? You are no longer that guy. So, let's just get this. So you are now living next to Helen, who you were married to from, was it the mid-90s to 2006? It was like, it was...
It was 90 to 95. Oh, no, excuse me. It was 90 to 05.
90 to 05.
Yeah, 15 years.
And you explained that a bit at the top of the show, but it's interesting because you got divorced. I mean, you wrote about how it seems like...
let's listen. Helen's the no-fly zone, sir. Yeah, there you go. It's my marriage. If I had a therapist, I wouldn't talk to my therapist about my marriage.
Okay, so, you've described yourself as Lutheran, and I have to say, half Jewish, half Catholic. I'm really nothing. I don't know many Lutherans. The most famous Lutheran I know is, you know who I'm going to say? Who's the most famous Lutheran besides you?
Garrison Keillor?
Garrison Keillor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm reading Garrison Keillor to find out about Lutherans, and I kind of get a sense of Lake Woebegone days, from Lake Woebegone days. And he wrote a poem actually called I'm a Lutheran. I'm going to read you just a second. We are modest people, and we never make a fuss, and it sure would be a better world if they were all as modest as us. We do not go for whooping it up or a lot of yickety-yak. When we say hello, we avert our eyes, and we always sit in the back. And I thought to myself, well, this guy can't be the same religion as James Ellroy, because this seems like the total opposite of you.
I think what Mr. Keillor is describing is a state of disparity between what Lutherans at all, perhaps, think they are, and what individuals might not be in the aggregate.
So, I mean, do you remember? I mean, were you brought up? I mean, he talks about a lot of coffee, a lot of like dinners in the basements, a lot of very long services. Is it like that for you?
The services were long. I always felt comfortable in them. The church I went to was in West Hollywood. It, I think, dissolved shortly after my childhood. It was at the corner of Doheny and Alden Drive. And it was a little white wood frame job. And my mother and I, after the divorce, lived across the carport. It was easy.
I don't know enough about Lutheranism to know what you believe will happen when you die. I assume that at some point you will die, as we all die. What's going to happen when you die? According to
Go to heaven. Go to heaven.
And how do you get there? I mean, do you have to repent? I mean, how does it work? Do you have?
That's part of the deal. Sir, I think we're getting off track here again.
James,
again,
why don't
I'm
James,
not a
okay.
spokesman.
All right, James. Why don't you ask me the questions and I'll answer them?
No.
Okay.
That's it. Let's talk about what I'd like to talk about.
What do you want to talk?
The podcast. Okay. I want to talk about the podcast.
All right.
James Ellroy's Hollywood Deathtrip. I want to talk about the transcription of nonfiction and fiction from.
So what podcast?
What
what podcast do you like, James?
I've never listened to one.
Okay.
I went right into performing them.
Do you understand the economics of them? Because I don't understand. You seem to understand.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And are there going to be any challenges has a novel actually been turned into a podcast before, or are you going to be the first one to do it?
American Tabloid.
You're the first. Well, I guess since you don't listen to them, we don't know.
12 episodes.
Do you miss LA? You live in Denver now.
Yeah, no.
Not at all?
No.
You obviously attained great commercial success. Can you tell me, and you have written that you're a great tipper. Do you enjoy money?
Yeah.
What do you like to spend it on?
Security. I like to upgrade to first class any chance I get to get more leg room in the seat. I like to take care of the very few people in my orbit. Yeah, I like to throw it around because I grew up poor and I started out as a writer, as a caddy at Bel Air Country Club. And if a golfer gave you an extra $20, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And then I could stay home the following day and work on the first 2 books that I was writing because I had the extra 20 scoots and could ply myself with food and pay my rent. So I throw it out there.
So we know many things.
It's the way to be. It's the way to be.
We know many things about Milton Berle. You caddied for him once. I'm assuming you caddied for many famous people. Was he a good tipper?
Yeah. Berle was a good tipper.
Who was a lousy tipper?
Fred McMurray, rest in peace. Double indemnity.
I know Fred McMurray. My 3 sons. He was a bad tipper.
Oh shit! When everybody else, even among the relative stiffs at Bel Air Country Club, gave you $2 above the $8 a bag minimum, McMurray would give you $1. And he had the heaviest golf bag on God's green earth, and it was full, the ball compartment, of scuffed golf balls that he'd gotten as freebies at invitational tournaments. The caddies thought of him as the King Duck at Bel Air Country Club.
Your latest novel, Widespread Panic, it's full of this amazing gossip. I don't know what parts of it are true. I know that one of the central parts of the plot is that there's this guy who's got this Marlon Brando photo. The main character is shopping around this photo of Marlon Brando filleting a fairly nicely sized penis.
Uh-huh.
And did you find anything else out about that? I mean, some people say it was Wally Cox. I mean, there is an extant photo that appears to be Marlon Brando with this penis in his mouth.
I don't know if it's true or not. Somebody showed me the picture. I mentioned it to him at lunch. They had their computer there. She tapped it in. I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Looked like him.
Yeah. I didn't know if there was any truth to any of the other stuff. I mean, I loved the idea that John Wayne was a borderline crossdresser. Was that?
Oh, he was.
I didn't know this.
John Wayne, crossdresser, yeah.
Does everybody know this? Am I the last person to find this out?
Yeah, no. You're the next to last. And there's a million of them because the people who listen to your broadcast will all know. I heard it a million times. He liked girls, but he liked to wear women's dresses. And I joke in the book that he wore a size 52 extra long muumuu. Looked good.
I don't know. I don't know what the tripwires are going to be, but you mentioned in the intro to your thing, you're the hog log and the big dick, and you talk extensively about your father's penis, which
Yeah, well, he had an 18-incher. There it is. That's a representation of it. And I know it's not a whacked out kid's recollection. This is all part and parcel about something I call dog humor. And widespread panic is suffused with this kind of humor. I love dogs. You like dogs?
I love dogs. I've got mine hidden away right now, so we don't hear her right now during this interview.
Okay. Well, God bless. I'm going to pray for your dog tonight, and you, and your listeners. And I love dogs insanely. And the antics of dogs, and dogs' bravura nature, and loving nature, and fierce nature moves me.
But did that have an impression? It seemed like it was actually common knowledge within your family, the size of his dick. And do you think that was he proud of it?
No, and next door, the kids would look over the wall, of the adjoining apartment building and go, check it out.
Yeah.
Because near the end of his life, my dad was senile.
Yeah.
And my dad was fluent in a bunch of languages. Our landlord was an Italian carpenter named Dino Lupo. And Dino, the old man's beast, after he had his first stroke, hung out the left leg of his jockey shorts, his boxer shorts. And Dino would go, hey, kid, come here. And he'd point to the old man. He'd go, hey, kid, your father. And he had the heavy Italian accent.
Yeah.
The bull. And he'd go like this. Yeah, that's the essence of dog humor.
I don't understand, and maybe you've changed this. You seem like a man who, you had dogs in the past, and you're a serial anthropomorphizer of dogs with funny dog voices and funny dog sayings and funny dog situations. But I read that you only actually now have an imaginary dog. You seem like the...
numerous imaginary dogs. See, here's the deal, Mr. Goldman. I can't live through the horror and pathos of another animal death. So I give lots of dough to animal causes. Lots of dough. Solicitation comes from the mail. Shit, give him some money.
This is we have a dog with a very silly name, and I tell you, I lost my parents, and my mother was especially hard, but I can't tell you how much dread I have in losing this dog. I've never gone through it. Can you tell me what...
My old... God bless him, I haven't seen him in years. My old editor at Vanity Fair, a man named Dana Brown, told me that when he lost his beloved pit bull, it was the worst morning of his life. And a woman colleague was sitting with us, and she couldn't believe it, that Dana had said this. And this was at a restaurant in New York. And he said, really, even the loss of your parents? And Dana Brown said, shit, yes. So I don't have to tell you.
Did you experience this? What was the last pet you lost?
Margaret. I mean, Helen and I were divorced then, but Margaret the Bull Terrier in 2013.
And was it just torture?
I got pictures of Margaret all over the place. Yeah. Kick-ass Red Bull Terrier.
Yeah. You've written 2 novels in your second LA Quartet, correct?
Yeah.
So, do you have any worries? I mean, do you think you're going to be able to knock? Are they next up? Are you going to be able to?
No, I'm writing a second Freddie Otesh book now. Then I go into the third LA Quartet.
Does it?
I'm 70. I'm 74. I'm healthy. I'm fit. There you go.
I gather you never.
If I were bald, I'd have the. If I weren't bald, I'd have the world by the nuts.
I gather you've never had writer's block. Is that the case?
No, it's true.
How does that work? Tell me about your discipline, sitting down and writing. When does it happen? Where do you do it?
I wake up, I roll out of bed, I say my prayers, I think, I make the bed, I have 2 cups of coffee, I look around, and I hit my desk. I got my huge outline, I've got all my notes, I got my white notebook paper, my black pens, my red pens, my fax machine. I see in the outline over here on my right where I left off the preceding day, and I go to work.
You were a caddy until actually I think that you sold your 6th novel. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1984. I was working at Waikiko Country Club in New Rochelle, New York.
You got some good reviews. You sold a few books. Do you think you would have been satisfied not being a huge best-selling author? Do you think that...
Yeah. And you know what? I remember where I was. I was on the first tee at Waikiko Country Club. It was a cold Saturday morning. I was bundled up, and I was getting $5,000 a book, and I couldn't afford to live on $5,000 a year, so I was caddying at Waikiko, and I was 36 years old, and I said, well, shit, all right. Yeah, you're getting published. People read your books.
Yeah.
There you go. I got a nice basement apartment with a fireplace, $60 a week. It ain't bad. It really ain't bad.
You have you've often described yourself as right wing, and I don't know, when you talk about spending your money on defense, I don't know if that means you have. Are you sitting on an arsenal?
Nah. Oh shit. No.
What I don't even know what security means.
What?
You said.
Listen, and we're getting into territory now. I don't like talking about politics. In fact, I would have said right at the front of the telecast, it's off the board. I don't like doing it. I don't like being categorized in these terms. There you go. I don't like being a personality anymore. Oh shit. All I want to talk about is each and every book or podcast that I have written or participated in or read from exclusively to the point. And that's, in this case, the single declarative sentence, Dead Women Own Me, from James Ellroy's Hollywood Deathtrip.
All right, let's talk about Dead Women Own Me. Back in 2006, you said you were never going to talk about the Black Dahlia or your mother's death ever again.
Yeah. And I was mistaken.
Yeah.
Boy, I blew that one, didn't I?
Well, I mean, it's something you've actually been very honest about it, about saying that you feel like you called yourself, I think, a gravedigger or some point, that I've invaded your crypt. And you said, I talked about my dead mother for the 3,000th time at this book reading. I'm paraphrasing now. So are you ambivalent about that still being kind of in the first paragraph of your biography and being the first episode of your podcast? You're really leaning into the dead mother.
Yeah. The podcast is something else entirely. Again, we come in the abstract to the whole idea of podcast form and how it transposes the written word and illuminates it for a wide array of English-speaking people.
Yeah.
For instance, vision-impaired people who can't read books or have the inability to read Braille.
Yeah.
It's a whole new audience for me that may drive people to the books. Particularly, and maybe we'll chat again, for American Tabloid when it comes out.
Oh, you think?
Hopefully, ironically, November 22nd. 12 hours, as opposed to these contained episodes.
I'm trying to imagine what your ideal interview is, because I read so much and there was so much I wanted to talk to you, but I'm looking over my notes and I'm being like, if I ask him that, he's going to fucking jump down my throat. I
think this is a good contentious interview.
Oh, you do?
I think, yeah, I do. I really do. I'm glad we got back on the horn. Really.
Well, do you want me to ask you the questions that I actually had written?
Yeah, and I'll just tell you yes or no,
You don't want to talk about ex-girlfriends, but I want to talk to you about it as a romancer. I mean, I read the Hilliker Curse, and it was amazing. I mean, You're somebody who would get a phone message and you would listen to it over and over from a woman. You had a dream in 1980 and you think that a woman 30 years later who was in your audience, you fell in love with her because she'd been in your dream. You sent letters frequently as though you were Beethoven and you were sending them to the immortal beloved. And, I just wondered, it seemed to me that something that you spent a lot of time on and possibly exhausting to be you as a romancer.
It's the best question anyone asked me, sir, in a very long time. Yeah, it's exhausting being me. Yeah. And God's been very, very kind to me, and I have a good work ethic, and I have gifts. I got sober the first time, 1977. Alcoholics Anonymous in the late 1970s was an extraordinarily permissive milieu. I exploited it. I was a big, good-looking kid, and all of a sudden women liked me, whereas before they were holding wolfsbane up to ward me off. I was a dipshit and a nose picker and everything else. I mean, here's a story as to how nutty the milieu was and how guilelessly good-natured underneath it all. Men and women would meet at a Sunday AA meeting on Federal Avenue in West LA. Meet. They have interacted. Instead of going out for coffee, they would take one or two cars to a joint on Olympic and Stewart, right on the Santa Monica, West LA border, called Hot Tub Fever. And I've been there 30 times with 30 different women. And I always paid because I always went 36 holes at Bel Air Country Club that day to have the dough. And sometimes women, like most of the time, would say no. But about 30 times, they'd say yes. So we'd go to Hot Tub Fever, and I'd rent what was a tiny, cramped cubicle with a hot tub and a half a dozen condoms on a shelf and an 8-track cassette player, and we'd chuck our duds and get in the water. And most of the time, it was just the idea of, is that I'm seeing a woman naked. Most of the time, we didn't do it. A few times we did. And they had a terry cloth bedlet, capable for a short person to lie down on, adjoining the hot tub, which is where you were supposed to do it.
When I read about
that's how nutty it was.
No,
that's how exploitative I was.
When I read about that, I had a few questions. First of all, isn't there some sort of AA, either official or unofficial rule about screwing the other members in the meeting, or is that not something that's part of AA? Giving me the jerk.
Yeah. In principle, maybe yes.
Yeah.
In practice, no. Not in 1977 to 1981.
Yeah. You described yourself as a degenerate drug addict for a long time.
Dope fiend, big dope fiend.
There was a period where you were doing breaking and entering, and I wasn't sure whether the primary motivation was for you to drink people's liquor or to sniff the panties. And I mean, I think that when you're sitting out in front of a house, are you thinking more about the drugs or the liquor, or are you thinking about sort of the sexual satisfaction of being in a girl's house?
My mind's going around like this. But when you have an outre backstory like mine, and you're besieged by media people who want to hear it, they exaggerate. It's a natural propensity because most interviewers haven't done what I've done. So between Christmas time or shortly after, 1966, I was 18, up through the summer of 1969 when I was 21. That's the summer of the Manson family killings.
Yeah.
I did it short of 20 times, I think, in houses where I knew the girls. And there was a whole craft to it. People didn't have answering services or telephone machines then. You called up ring, ring, ring. They don't answer. They're not home. In and out. It's not hard to do. You vault into dog doors, reach in, long skinny arms, tap the latch, stuff like this.
Yeah.
And okay, so maybe 20 minutes each time in and out aggregate. I was a scaredy cat.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd go to county jail. Yeah, that didn't scare me. But prison, penitentiary for burglary, which is technically what this is, no. And I stopped in the summer of '69. And I stopped directly because of the Manson killings, because more and more people in this area, Hancock Park, started getting the security signs staked into their front lawn.
Yeah.
But the thing is, as accumulatively force in my imaginative life, it's negligible. It's a minute proportion of my time as a dipshit on the loose. What I primarily did at the time was read. And even when I had no pad and sleeping in parks, I'd read in public libraries. Read. I'm a testament to the curative power of fiction, specifically nonfiction. Reading in public libraries. I can recall stints, 2-week-long stints of reading in public libraries that cumulatively eclipsed and blitzed all my time doing this peeper break-in shit. It's minute, but it's snazzy compared to Ellroy, age 20, read in public libraries sometimes as long as 10, 12 hours.
Well, no, you
a
didn't.
day.
You didn't spend chapters writing about your reading habits. You spent a lot.
No.
You spent a lot of time, and it just seems like there must have been. I was trying to figure out what the thrill was.
You know what the thrill is? Here's the thrill. I'm very, 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 very curious about people. Have always been very, very, very curious about sexuality. I was then, and I am now. There was a gag line from, I think it was a nightclub comic that says it all. The nightclub comic says, I want to find the guy who invented sex and ask him what he's working on now. And and you're right, it's the funniest line ever. And that's the goad for me.
Here's another quote that's been attributed to you, and I wanted to find out if it was legit or not. I'm a master of fiction. I am also the greatest crime writer who ever lived. I am to the crime novel in specific what Leo Tolstoy is to the Russian novel and what Ludwig van Beethoven is to music. Is that accurate?
I've never read a Tolstoy book. It's not a crime book. I've never read Dostoevsky. Joyce Carol Oates called me the American Dostoevsky. I know why, but, because people have told me about Dostoevsky. I have been all my life, since early 1960, I've been obsessed with Beethoven and classical music. I had a music appreciation class at John Burroughs Junior High. Teacher was a hep cat guy named Alan Himes. He had a bust of Beethoven on his desk. He used to pat it when he'd walk by. He had a record player on his desk. And one morning early in the course, he said, hey, kids, dig this. And he took the stylus and he put it down on the record and it went, dun, 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 dun. And Beethoven and I, like this, ever since.
You are a provocateur, and it's easy to notice from actually talking to you for this short time. I think that you described as a young person requiring a lot of attention. I'm trying to remember if it was your wild man act that you would call it. Was that what it was?
I think I said I was an acquired taste that no one ever acquired. Yeah, and I was a glory hound. I was the dipshit guy who wasn't a tough guy, wasn't good in sports, wasn't a good student at school. But was a nose picker, and you always noticed him.
You once sort of boiled it down to, if you can't love me, notice me. Do you feel like the provocateur stuff is about seeking love?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the books are about love.
Yeah. I think it's very much a different world now. And what's interesting about your books is that they're very much written with the lingo of the time, and much of it is sort of casually racist. And I feel like it's, have your publishers, has anybody told you, I can't imagine anybody could really tell you anything that this is not tolerated anymore, that even if people spoke like this, we're going to clean up the language. We don't want to see the N-word anymore. We don't want to see guys being called fags. We can't do that. Has anybody said this to you?
Yeah, people have mentioned it in previous books, and there you go. If you look at the first two books of the LA Quartet, there's some of that, and the ultimate hero of the book is a Japanese homosexual.
Yeah.
And it's about, both books are, Perfidion the Storm, the grave injustice of the Japanese internment.
So do you think it's...
And I think context there explicates the time. I think people see and can concede where the soul of the book rests.
You seem like a guy who's probably not overly fearful about the idea of cancellation. You don't seem like somebody who is living in fear of, I don't know.
What? So, some shit from my past coming back to haunt me?
You're not
Everybody has secrets. Everybody has made injudicious, heedless, vile comments. I have repented my inactions.
What does the repentance look like?
Dear Lord, I have done this.
Yeah.
Suffuse me with thy will so that I may not repeat this sin.
Yeah.
It's about it.
Yeah. So lefty publications tend to love to write that, Ellroy writes this way. He likes to write, he writes those words, but he seems to like them too much. And then they might bring up the fact that as a kid, you identified as a Nazi, which you've addressed before as like a little kid. And then in Los Angeles Magazine, of all places, Amy Wallace, when she profiled you in 2010, noted, and I wondered if it was just me, noted that your mustache that you wore for many years was Hitlerian. So,
well, that's about my physiognomy, Mr. Goldman. I got, when I had darker hair, it was a toothbrush mustache. It always goes out to here. And I can see on you got gray hair on the sides, but your mustache is darker. And since I was bald, when I met Amy Wallace of LA Magazine, I had it out to here, suffused with darkness, some gray bristles. I look pretty good.
Did you shave out of an excess of caution of being sort of...
No, I still have the damn mustache. It's here. It's just white.
There's a mustache there?
Yeah, I know.
Holy
My upper lip is pronounced, but I got white. Listen.
Yeah.
I
want to ask you a question that's maybe going to piss you off, but I mean, I know you don't seem to be that. I don't want to talk about specific women, but you seem to be some.
No, come on.
I'm not asking you about
Mr. Goldman.
I'm not asking you about any specific women. I'm not asking you about specific women.
Ask me a question.
I'm not asking you. God, I'm sort of getting the sense that maybe as angry as you seem sometimes, you're enjoying yourself. Is that?
I'm having a blast now. We put our shit behind us.
Okay. When you tell a woman, when she disrobes and you write about seeing her breasts and weeping uncontrollably, how does a woman respond to that? Is that something?
Well, that was a prostitute, by the way.
Oh, that was a prostitute?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought...
From the Hilliker Curse, yeah.
Oh, I thought that was Joan.
In Hollywood.
Oh, I thought that was Joan. No, there was a period... No. Do you still go to prostitutes? There was a period where you were picking...
No, come on.
What?
Sir, come on.
What? You had periods that you've written about. You called it a crack up. You went away. It seemed like you were suffering, from what I could tell, from panic disorder. Is that what it was?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. My nerves were sure as hell shot to shit.
It sounded awful. It sounded like there was some hypochondria. You felt like every bump you had was cancer.
Yeah.
I
cracked up. I've been working too hard for too long. 23 years. Just bam, 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 bam. All day, all night. Work. Book tours all over the place.
And how do you get better if you have gotten better?
I
assume
gotten
you're better.
I'm here talking to you. I'm 74 and I'm healthy as shit.
But how do it? I mean, sometimes I've had my own periods of depression, and I've gotten into meditation. I've gotten into various things. What did you find? If one cracks up, what is the James Ellroy cure for cracking up?
Yeah.
Seek God.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy.
It's not. It's difficult.
Well, actually, it is very difficult. Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like I could ever seek God. I mean, don't you have to have grown up with some sense that God is real?
You gotta hit the shit.
How do you do that?
Hit the shit. I don't know. I don't know what anybody's hit the shit quotient of endurance is. Mine's pretty high, but I've hit the shit more than once.
You never did tell me whether you thought you're the greatest crime novelist of all time. I mean,
I've
tried
to. Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
And you're not going to tell me what right wing means now, because I'm actually very interested in thinking people what they thought about 2016. I have a lot of conservative
I know
friends.
you do. And you know what? You're in a unique position with me. I no longer want to do interviews that are this personal, this up close, and this contentious. Yeah, I want to do.
Oh God, I thought this is 5 minutes after 5 minutes after you said you were enjoying it.
I was.
James, I can't decide.
Let me tell you what I want to talk about. I want to talk.
Tell me, because I
want to talk about books. Shit. I want to talk about the printed word transposed to podcast form. It's what
I found was actually
to pitch.
Okay, let's yell over each other. Let's yell over each other. Why haven't I didn't see you having read your novels before, and you actually you're quite adept at audio. You're sort of a natural at it. So why haven't you read your books before?
I've read the abridged My Dark Places from Random House Audio. I read an abridged The Hilliker Curse for Random House Audio, but it's not combined with the artistry of podcast form. The interposed actors and actresses' voices, the period music, the great sound effects. It doesn't comprise a sustained reading experience on the level of podcasts. In my view, podcasts render audiobooks moribund. And that's moving to me because of the pure nature of the transposition.
But before our dramatic beginning, what's the last thing that pissed you off?
Nothing pissed me off. Nothing pissed me off. I need to take a leak. What else? I've been drinking coffee.
No, I feel special.
All morning.
I felt like maybe you were generally sort of a little volcanic. I started with an icebreaker and got a volcano.
Yeah,
so
I
didn't know if
Jimmy told me it was an icebreaker, before the volcano erupted. And there you go. I mean, I get pissed off momentarily at people, places, and things. And I generally step back. I mean, God ain't through with me yet. And you know what, Mr. Goldman, here's the thing. I like you. It just, I don't dislike you.
Yeah. I just want you to know, were I interviewing Jennifer Aniston after she'd written her very tender memoir about her childhood, I would not ask her about her pornography habits. I have written I know so much about, it's actually funny. I feel like I know a lot about your sexuality, but not actually about the sex act itself, which I feel like
that's
you didn't write about.
That's a great query. That's a great
query. Tell me why.
I'll tell you. And I just did in the second Otesh book that I'm writing now. There's a segue, they have some dialogue, and then they're in the sack and they're talking. And no, I don't like writing sex scenes. It's between the characters. We all have, each and every one of us, imaginations to supply the details.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Even characters are entitled to their private sex.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a religious background? Do you think that
I don't know.
because
I don't know
people-
where it derives from. You know what it derives from? It derives from craft. It is my instinct in each and every time in my books, going way, way back to my kid books. There's some sex scenes in my kid books.
I know that there will be people who are listening to this who are aspiring writers who are going to be like, what do I need to do in order to have Ellroy's career or have his output?
My advice to young people is very simple. I tell them, the books you read now inform your latter talent or lack of it. Do not think that your personal experience should be your basic topic. Do not write what you know. Write the books that you've read, that you've loved. Project it onto the abstraction of the book that you think no one has ever written and only you can write. Live in that component of your egotism and assume the sale that you can do it. Be dumb and stupid and rather brave like yours truly was in 1979. Just assume it. It costs you nothing. Chances are that me, you, Don DeLillo, Toni Morrison, Shakespeare, Ernest Hemingway, all these, big folks, Joyce Carol Oates, chances are that when they started out writing that they were going to bite the big chorizo. But they plowed forward and they proved that their confidence in themselves, however shaky at first, was justified.
I don't want to end this with like an explosion, but I thought actually I've read a great deal. I read the Hilliker Curse. The Hilliker Curse writes about, and you don't want to talk about specific people, so I'm not going to name her, but it writes about, you kind of ride off in the sunset with a character at the end, who's somebody whose memoir you have edited. And then she came out with a memoir which you, I guess, had helped her edit, which was not flattering to you.
Did you? We're near the end.
All right. And I'm not gonna ask you specifically about Helen, but what is the best thing about not living with your partner?
Come and go as you please. She's just down the hall. The commute is about 16 seconds. And if you enjoy your separate solitude, as Helen and I do, Daddy-o, that's it.
Well, this has been interesting. James Ellroy, it has not been my easiest interview.
Right. Nor mine. This is a introductory audio tour interview. It was unusually provocative and rigorous because the podcast at hand focused on autobiographical episodes of crime pieces I had written that deal with misogynistic violence and my personal history of it and reaction to it. So I'm not surprised the questions you've asked, provocative or not, came up.
James Ellroy, thank you so much for coming. The series is on Audible. It's called James Ellroy's Hollywood Deathtrip. And how much does it cost to? You don't know that. How much it costs to get on Audible, right? You have no idea.
No.
It's probably it's a list $10 or $11 a month.
Right? Yeah. Helen told me. Yeah, it's a good deal for everything you get.
Yeah.
$11 a month. Shit.
Something like that. And you get lots of books, and you get James Ellroy's Hollywood Deathtrip, and he may come to your house and argue with you and dislike the questions that you ask, but it'll make for an interesting day.
Yeah.
You should do a lottery for some sort of confrontation with a listener.
I'm pretty soft-hearted. Yeah, truth be told. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll pray for you and your dog tonight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
James Ellroy, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
So did I.
All right.
Godspeed.
That's our show. If you liked it, please subscribe, rate, and tell either 12 or 14 of your friends to do the same. We are hereby retiring the use of the number 13 on the originals. If you have any interest in seeing the mug behind the voice in a gorgeous portrait shot by Patrick Cavan Brown, shot just an hour or so after the conclusion of this conversation, I highly recommend you pick up the July print issue of Los Angeles Magazine, in which resides the print version of this interview, as well as an amazing tale of the sex and drug scandal that sank a USC dean. One postscript to listeners, I was actually being mostly candid when I said that I enjoyed the interview. Ellroy's bluster, it seemed to me, was largely theatrics, and even if it wasn't, I chose to treat it that way. And I am in no way trying to create some Jimmy Fallon level of breathless fandom for those who come here, but they are my guests, and I really do want them to be comfortable. So, I've thought a lot about this one, and while I certainly think I blew the icebreaker, I now believe that it's possible Ellroy might have showed up half-cocked because of something that had absolutely nothing to do with me, but something which I alluded to in the interview. Ellroy's 2010 memoir, The Hilliker Curse, ends with Ellroy proclaiming that he's located his soulmate, his match, in a writer named Erica Schickel, whose memoir Ellroy was then helping to edit. Last year, Schickel released that memoir, but with a bunch of new material about her ill-fated relationship and very unhappy breakup with Ellroy, who she refers to as Sam Spade in her book, but who's immediately recognizable as Ellroy. It was not long after this breakup that Ellroy returned to his ex-wife, Helen Canode. Since Schickel was not my guest, I'm going to refrain from going into the particulars of the behaviors she alleges. As many personal details as Ellroy shared about other women in the Hilliker Curse, I sense he wasn't tickled when an ex-girlfriend shared so much about him. Ellroy says that he doesn't harbor regrets about anything, but my inkling after this interview is that given the benefit of hindsight, he'd probably refrained from publishing the Hilliker Curse, which, upon its publication, was deemed by some reviewers as 203 pages of TMI. Had I known this beforehand, I think this interview would have gone much smoother. This episode was produced by myself and Rob Heath, who years ago learned to only date women who wear long sleeves because the sight of their naked elbows would always drive him to tears. Special thanks to Jimmy Jelinek at Audio Up and Allison Weber at Audible Originals. Thanks also to the entire crack team at Los Angeles Magazine, notably Joseph Kapsch, Andrew Curry, Chris Nichols, and Silver Fox editor Mayor Rashawn. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.